we'll be starting in a minute. We are running a little late, but we'll get going. Make sure everyone's in. Well, I'm going to tell you that it feels very strange standing up here. For a Jewish kid growing up in an Anglican country, standing on a Baptist pew, I'm confused. Well, welcome to our audience here in the Glendale Baptist Church and to those online. Last check, there were 47 people online as well as all the people that are in here. So thank you very much for coming. We really do appreciate it. And our program tonight is being provided by Nashville chapter of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. These people. And we call ourselves AU. So whenever we talk about AU. Americans United is a non-partisan organization dedicated to preserving the constitutional principle of church-state separation and religious freedom for all Americans. Through advocacy, education, and litigation, Americans United works to ensure that government remains neutral on matters of faith and that religious liberty is protected for everyone. The First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America is all about freedoms. Talk about freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, like we are doing here, freedom to petition the government. But the first two freedoms, not in error, are the freedoms of religion. Freedom from religion, the Establishment Clause, the government shall not have a religion, and the freedom of religion, that you can be whatever you want to be. It's not no one's business. They can interfere with you, you can interfere with them. So that's where we have, and this is where we're at now, how these clauses are being distorted by Christian nationalists and their Project 2025 plan to destroy these freedoms. That's really what we want to talk about here tonight. My name is Mirabelle Stoder. I am the president of the Nashville chapter of AU. We're a small, all-volunteer group with affiliates in Knoxville, Upper Cumberland, and Rutherford County. And we are very pleased to be able to bring you tonight's amazing program. Thanks to our hosts, we are warm, well-fed, and ready to go. Reverend April Baker and the parishioners have provided the great spread you see in the lobby. Maggie, our AV tech there, is helping us get all the sound out. And guess what I forgot? Yeah. Please turn off your phones. Okay, with affiliates, I don't remember where I was now, in Knoxville, Upper Cumberland, and Rutherford County. And we are very pleased to be able to bring you tonight's amazing program. And I know I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Thanks to our hosts, we are warm, well-fed, and ready to go. Reverend April Baker and the parishioners of this church have provided the food, and Maggie Thomas as our AV technician. We are asking for some donations if you'd like to. The ways to give are on the registration table or in the link sent to you in your email reminder if you registered online. Sponsors, we have some sponsors, people that helped us defray some of these expenses. Middle Tennessee Humanists, which is a community dedicated to promoting secular humanism and the separation of church and state. Do we have somebody? Where is Calais? No, well, oh, there you are. Calais from Middle Tennessee Humanists. Sunday Assembly Nashville, Okay, there we go. Hi there. Whose mission it is to help people find and fulfill their potential. Secularizing US. There we go. This is a new organization founded in November 2024, dedicated to supporting atheists, humanists, and secular individuals, primarily in the southern United States. But some of us are good guys too, right? Please feel free to stay after the program to mingle, have a snack, check out the materials brought by our sponsors, and ask any questions you may have of our sponsors. Or of Americans United. For the online audience, we're going to get the links into the chat for you so that you can go to these organizations and see what they're all about. So the program today will consist of our two speakers, Andrew Seidel, VP of Strategic Communications for our national organization in Washington, D.C., and Monte Mader, a deconstructed former alt-right Christian nationalist. I love saying that. And they'll each speak individually, and then later on they will have a conversation about Christian nationalism and anything else they can think of speaking about. And at the end we will have a quick Q&A session. The people online, please make sure that you put your questions and comments in the Q&A, not in the chat. It's difficult to follow them in the chat. If you have any questions for our sponsors, they will be happy to speak to you in the lobby afterwards. I first came across Monte Mader on Instagram and was blown away by her insights and wisdom. When setting up this event, I took a shot, sent an invitation, and here she is. Monte was born and raised on a cattle ranch in Wyoming by her father, a passionate musician and rock music lover. Monte's early life was steeped in Christian fundamentalism and conservative politics. She pursued theological studies in Israel and was immersed in environments that emphasized obedience and traditional gender roles. However, personal experience and critical reflection led her to question and eventually deconstruct these belief systems. Her podcasts take deep dives into evangelical deconstruction, current events, American history, and what the Bible actually says. Her Coven of Curiosity Bible classes teach that Jesus is woke. Welcome, Monte Mader.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. As she said, I'm a former alt-right Christian nationalist. I grew up in Gillette, Wyoming, and my family stockpiled arms against the government, in case they Ruby Ridged us. And we were told that one day the Democrats would hold us at gunpoint and ask us if we believed in God, and it was our obligation to die for our faith. So far, I have not been scared of a Democrat once in my new life. So I'm very excited to have you here. I'm very thankful to have everyone online. I think that the scariest thing and maybe the most pressing danger that we have right now is Christian nationalism, because Christian nationalism not only does not believe in religious plurality, but they don't believe in the freedom of the individual. It is actually the antithesis of what they claim America stands for. It's you have the freedom to believe as long as you believe what I believe. You have the freedom to do as long as you do what I think you should do. So I'm very thankful for all of you who are a part of these movements, trying to stop the wave. I'm very thankful for Andrew's work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce him, and he's going to give the primary piece of our talk today and then do some Q&A and hopefully come out of here a little bit more encouraged, a little bit more equipped for what's going on in the world. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with Andrew Seidel. I had the pleasure of meeting Andrew at in DC this last April, working around separation of church and state and religious freedom summit. So he is one of our nation's leading voices in the First Amendment, the fight to preserve real religious freedom, which means the freedom of and from religion. He is a civil rights attorney, constitutional scholar, prominent expert on church-state separation. He currently serves as the Vice President of Strategic Communications at Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, and previously spent nearly a decade as a constitutional litigator with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Andrew is the author of The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, and The American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom, two landmark books that expose the rise of Christian nationalism that I grew up with, and how it's reshaping religious liberty by using the court system. This has been a long plan for a long period of time. In fact, when my dad realized I was smart, he was like, oop, new plan. You're going to get married and have kids someday because you have to, Bible says so. But we're going to put you in law school first. We're going to get you on the Supreme Court, and you're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. That's a direct quote from my father. Yeah, oops. His commentary has appeared widely in major media, legal forums, and public advocacy campaigns. He's a dynamic communicator, a tireless advocate. Andrew Seidel is bringing us clarity, courage, and constitutional expertise to what I consider to be the most urgent issue facing democracy today. Please welcome Andrew Seidel.
Thank you, Monte. I feel kind of powerful up here. White Christian nationalism is the single biggest threat to a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And I actually said that to a room full of religion reporters in the fall of 2019, experts in this area. And none of them really, they kind of had like blank stares on their faces. But 16 months later, those Christian nationalists that I was warning against attacked the beating heart of American democracy and tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power and overturn a free and fair election. But what exactly is Christian nationalism? So if you ask sociologists, scholars in this area, journalists, Christians, they're going to have slightly different answers. And they all kind of come from that scholarly standpoint. They're studying Christian nationalism. They didn't necessarily grow up in it like Monte did, and they haven't spent their career fighting it like I have. And so that's the perspective that I bring to it. I've been fighting Christian nationalism in the courts, in the legislatures, in the public square for 15 years now. And I want to give you some elements of a definition that I think are, rather than wordsmithing a perfect definition, let's just talk about some of the common themes. I'm going to give you 3 elements, and then Christian nationalism's ultimate goal. And the first element is right there in the name, Christian nation. The idea of a Christian nation, and this is actually what gives the ideology its name, that idea that we were founded as a Christian nation based on Judeo-Christian principles, that is integral to their ideology. And the second element that is important is they believe we have strayed from that foundation. We've gotten away from our godly roots. And they use the language of return, of getting back to those godly roots, of getting America back the way it was intended, the way it was founded, making it great again, for instance, to justify all manner of hateful and unpopular public policy. So if you think back to things like the Muslim ban, great example of white Christian nationalism written into our law. The child separation policy from Trump 1.0, how many people remember that? Right? That was justified by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions by pointing to Romans 13. He cited the Bible to justify separating families and putting kids in cages. So did Sarah Huckabee Sanders, then the press secretary. The attack on the Capitol, the insurrection on January 6th. Project 2025, which was already mentioned once tonight. I mean, this is a playbook for theocracy. It's a playbook for a Christian nation. I just did a podcast episode about how what's happening with our military strikes in the Caribbean is actually quite related to this. And that brings me to the third kind of element of this definition. And that is that Christian nationalism operates as a permission structure. And what I mean by that is it is based on religious beliefs and religious identity. They believe this is their country, given to them by their God, that they are defending God's chosen candidate for office, and that anything that goes against that is therefore against God's will. And that belief gives them permission to subjugate their innate humanity, their innate empathy, all of these other things that should counteract, that say, hey, don't put kids in cages. Don't bomb innocent people who are floating, in the middle of the ocean. It allows them to subjugate that innate humanity and empathy in pursuit of power. And I think it's inevitable that violence is the result of this permission structure, because reality is always going to collide with that belief system, whether it is in the form of, raw voting tallies, for instance, that say God's chosen candidate did not win, or something else. And the end response to that is almost always going to be, at some point, violence. Now, the goal of Christian nationalism is to create that Christian nation. It's to rewrite and redefine what it means to be an American, redefine our Constitution. The goal is to create two classes of people, right? Christians and everybody else, except not just any Christian. You have to be the right kind of conservative Christian. You have to be straight, white, heteronormative, conservative Christian man. That's going to be the privileged, favored class, and everybody else is going to be a second-class citizen. And the law will protect those in that favored class, but not bind them. Protect, but not bind. You can see that in the administration right now. The law will bind everybody else, but not protect them. You can see that happening now too. And I just want to be absolutely clear. All you equality-minded Christians, our lovely hosts tonight, people who think that, loving your neighbor, that biblical command means like all humans and not just the people who look like you or were born in the same county as you, things like that, not just the white Christian second-generation Americans, you're not in that favored class. You are excluded. And I want to give you one example that is unique to Tennessee. There was actually a line in the Project 2025 handbook. So when this handbook first leaked, at Americans United, we started going over it, with a fine-tooth comb. And one line from that handbook, one section, grew out of a case actually here in Tennessee, I think. We're pretty sure. Liz and Gabe Root and Ram wanted to foster and adopt a child. They live over in Knoxville, and they identified a special needs child that they hoped to bring into their family. But first, they had to complete this foster parent training program that the state requires, and they had to receive a state certification, which makes perfect sense. That's something we want to protect those kids. They were referred to Holston United Methodist Home for Children. So this is a state-funded agency that trains and certifies potential foster families. And Holston Home refused to work with Liz and Gabe. Not because they're bad parents or their home didn't have space or they couldn't afford to financially support children. They refused to work with Liz and Gabe because they're Jewish. And that bigotry is bad enough, but it was funded by you. Taxpayer money was going to that organization. And that discrimination was committed in the name of religious freedom. That child was denied a loving home with a loving couple because Liz and Gabe are Jewish. That happened in America in 2021. Americans United for Separation of Church and State took on Liz and Gabe's case. We're still litigating it. We've actually taken on a number of cases like theirs over the years. We've clashed repeatedly with the Christian nationalist groups that are behind Project 2025. And the groups that are, they're working overtime to ensure that they can discriminate using this claim of religious freedom and using your taxpayer dollars. And we were reading through the Project 2025 handbook, and then it singles out cases like Liz and Gabe's. It says, quote, "The faith-based adoption agencies that serve these children are under threat from lawsuits." And it goes on to say, because they cannot in good conscience place children in every household due to their religious beliefs. And they are, of course, also talking about LGBTQ foster families and parents, right? They specifically mention man and woman in that definition as well. But there is no amount of power or privilege that will satisfy the Christian nationalists. They will not stop until we stop them, right? They are going to make religious freedom into a license to discriminate. They're coming for contraception. They want a nationwide abortion ban. They're coming for marriage equality. They want an unfettered right to discriminate. They're openly talking about repealing the 19th Amendment. They want to be a special favored class and everybody else is going to be a second-class citizen. That is their goal, and that is why it is such a damn threat. And that is why we, the people, have a moral and civic duty to fight white Christian nationalism, to relegate it back to the fringe whence it came. We have endured, this nation has endured previous waves of Christian nationalism, survived it, pushed it back to the fringe, and we can do it again. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more tonight. I'm going to give you 4 ways that you can fight back against Christian nationalism. The first is you've got to fight and debunk Christian nationalist disinformation. And in a few weeks, it's going to be 2026, which is crazy in its own way because time is just so messed up these days. But that's the 250th anniversary of American independence. And as we get closer to the 4th of July, the floodgates of Christian nationalist disinformation are going to open. And finding accurate facts about our history amidst the Christian nationalist disinformation and the AI slop that is going to be out there, it is going to be like trying to take a drink from a fire hose. And you need to be ready. You need to arm yourselves with the real facts, with the actual history, with reality, and likely some physical copies of books. And the reason that I think this is important is because Christian nationalism is an entire identity that is based on disinformation. It's an entire identity based on disinformation. This is why I wrote my first book, The Founding Myth. There is no scholarly debate about whether or not America was founded as a Christian nation. It wasn't. This is not really up for debate. Christian nationalism is instead, it's a sinister exclusionary movement, and it's an attempt to redefine what it is to be an American and redefine it according to that Christian nationalist disinformation, and then reshape the law accordingly. And you've heard the disinformation many times before, that we're one nation under God, and in God we trust, and that the Declaration of Independence references the Christian God 4 times, and that they prayed at the Constitutional Convention, and that the Bible was the most cited book by the Founding Fathers, and that George Washington knelt in the snow at Valley Forge and prayed, and that our laws are based on the 10 Commandments. None of that is true. It's propaganda. It's oft-repeated, never substantiated. But I also think that this gives us an opening. That I think there's actually an opportunity here, because without their origin myths, without that disinformation, their identity begins to wither. Their entire political and ideological reality is actually incredibly weak because it's based on these historical distortions and lies. And it also becomes clear when you explore this how truly un-American this political ideology is. But we really do need more than facts to fight back. We need better arguments. If facts were all that mattered, propaganda would not work. So we actually need arguments that are more visceral and emotional. That is important. That's one of the reasons I wrote The Founding Myth and why I chose to call Christian nationalism un-American. And I have had those arguments in and out of court for 15 years. I know what works, I know what doesn't, and if you want to know what works, please go to the public library, go support your public library. Sorry, publisher, they hate it when I tell you to do that. Get a copy of The Founding Myth, because I wrote it to utterly destroy this un-American ideology. And somebody pointed out to me earlier tonight that we're actually just a few miles, apparently, from Pastor Greg Locke's joint. Yeah. And if you don't know, he took out a video camera and a blowtorch and filmed himself burning a copy of The Founding Myth. So that's how scared they are of the information that's in there. But again, it's an entire identity based on disinformation. And the white in white Christian nationalism is wrapped up in this disinformation in the most absurd way. There's these portraits of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus that were super popular in the 1930s and 40s, and that ain't it, right? Like, Jesus was not a white guy. Monte, are there any white people in the Bible at all? 0 white people in the Bible, not a single one. And yet they've wrapped their white supremacy in its pages and in its mantle. So we can beat that Christian nationalist disinformation. We can beat it with the truth. And I know there's some despair about this, but really once their eyes are open to the truth, they can't really close them again. And sometimes they become the fiercest advocates against Christian nationalism. So that's number one. And number two is defend the separation of church and state, because it is the cure for Christian nationalism. And the wall of separation between church and state is an American original. It is an American invention. The idea was born in the Enlightenment, but it was first implemented in the American experiment. Until then, no other nation in the history of the world had sought to protect the ability of its citizens to think freely by separating religion and government. And there's a lot that's wrong with our Constitution, but if you look at it, the truly unique and original elements are what give us that secular foundation, those secular foundations, that separation. And it's not just the First Amendment. Our Constitution was the first to declare that power comes from we, the people. And that is a declaration of power, right? Those words, they're poetic, but they are much more than that. They say that power comes from us, not God's. And that was the first time in human history that had been done. It's the first governing document not to mention a god or a deity at all. And that actually pissed quite a few people off in the founding generation. They objected to not mentioning a god or a deity, including a particular god or deity. And those objections were overridden. And then you get Article 6, which is some of the most clear and emphatic language in a document that's often deliberately vague. Like, right, remember back to your high school history class, you learned the Constitution's kind of an outline. They knew later generations were going to come in and add meat to the bones later on. Not Article 6. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion is the First Amendment. Everybody knows that one. But does anybody know what's in Article 6? No religious test. Yeah, no religious test. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust. No, shall, ever, any. I mean, these are clear, emphatic commands. No religious tests. And then after all of that, then you get that beautiful language in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and then going on to enumerate 4 more rights, all in an effort to guarantee religious freedom and that separation. And there really is a whole lot that's wrong with our Constitution. That's a whole other talk. But those secular foundations they make it not only unique, and are genuine contributions to political science and political thought, but also contributions to all humanity. And those contributions are threatened, undermined, and under attack by white Christian nationalism. And that really is one of the reasons that Christian nationalists have targeted that separation. Is why they spend so much time lying about our history and our founding and who we are as a nation. It's because the separation of church and state protects everyone. Their goal of that privileged special class is impossible if we separate church and state. Church-state separation is freedom. It is the basis of freedom of thought from which speech and assembly and press and petition and so many of the other rights that we care about flow. It's the only foundation for true religious freedom. You cannot have genuine religious freedom without a government that is free from religion. It does not work. Anything else gets you some version of religious supremacy, and then religions vying for that supreme spot. Separation of church and state is also the bedrock of true equality. Because if I can recommend even, let alone force, but force or even recommend that you support a religion, whether it's with currency or with fealty, then you have been made lesser. And the adherents of that religion have been made superior. They have been privileged. And if a government that draws its power from all the people, writes one religion into its law, we are by definition no longer equal. We're in that Animal Farm situation where some are more equal than others. And that also means that the American ideal, this is flopping around. Does it look funny to y'all? It feels, Also means that this American ideal is the basis for self-government and basically our democracy. Because shielding our shared laws from the influence of any one religion is what frees us to come together and build that stronger democracy. So our democracy, our freedom depend on this separation. It is really time that we realize that aspiration of an America where the separation of church and state is absolute. So if you want to fight white Christian nationalism, fight for church-state separation. Okay, so that's 2. 3 is I need you to refuse to accept the tyranny of Christian nationalism. And what I mean by that is they want you to believe that, like Thanos, they are inevitable. They actually depend on this, and they are not. Again, this country has survived various waves of Christian nationalism throughout our history. We've beaten it back. We can win again. And we have living proof here in this room. You. I've talked to a number of you before this, and some of you. My friend Monte here, right? Monte is an example. She's brilliant, sure, at attacking Christian nationalism and a lot of the bullshit that surrounds it, but she often does that by talking about her personal story, where she came from and how she got away. She left Christian nationalism behind because people can absolutely change their minds about these things, about bad ideas. Life's too good to waste on bad ideas. Monte's story, maybe yours, right? Show that Christian nationalism is not inevitable. And there is power in your personal story. So tell your personal story of fighting Christian nationalism, of escaping Christian nationalism, of the dangers of Christian nationalism. And this goes hand in hand with debunking Christian nationalist disinformation. It really does. Because the human mind is only ever going to shift so much with facts and data and history and truth. That's why I said we need some of those more emotional gut punch arguments. But even better than that are personal stories. And if that's not you, that's okay. There's so much else you can do to join this fight. You can join Americans United. Americans United has an action network. We've got a ton of toolkits on our website for parents, for teachers, for students. We've got a Project 2025 toolkit. There's one on holiday displays coming out in a couple days. Look up where your member of Congress is having their next town hall. And if they're not having a town hall, which a lot of them are not these days, go to your school board. Go out and protest. Tell the would-be kings that we don't do that in this country. Come to events like this. Tell your friends. My good friend Catherine is here tonight and was texting, I think, everybody in her entire phone, telling them about this. Don't let your extremist uncle get away with spreading that disinformation at the next family gathering. They want you to feel powerless. They really do, but you're not. And when you begin to take action, even these small things, the littlest way of fighting back, when you start making a call to your member of Congress or showing up at a meeting or going to a protest or doing anything other, pretty much, than doom scrolling or commenting online, you begin to realize that power. And look, you're not going to change the world on your own, but we're not asking you to. We're asking you to join with other people, and together you can change the world. And the fourth thing that you can do, and this event is just such a perfect example of it, is center our shared values. So my friend Chrissy Stroop first said this to me, and she said that shared values matter more than shared beliefs. Center those shared values as you organize, because shared values matter more than shared beliefs. I am an atheist, and I would far rather have a drink and a chat, secularizing, maybe split some guacamole with a justice, equality-minded Christian than an atheist who is anti-equality. There aren't many of those, but there are some, and they're quite loud. Shared values matter more than shared beliefs, and that is especially true when we as a nation face an existential threat like white Christian nationalism. It is especially true. My dream would be to live in a country where the separation of church and state is valued by everyone, where we all understand that true religious freedom can only exist with that separation, and the nonprofit that I work for is sadly no longer needed. It's a weird thing about working at a nonprofit where you're trying to put yourself out of a job, but I want to live in a country where that is unnecessary, where we can get together and have those deep, fascinating conversations, about the nature of the universe and disagree about those things. And right now, at this moment, it is far more important that we get together and fight this un-American movement, because they would if given the power that they want, make those conversations impossible. And in fact, like try to outlaw the people on both sides of that. So our country is on fire. Our democracy isn't so much slipping away as it's being stolen. Right? The republic is being strangled. And those of us who share values like equality and justice and truth and fairness have to come together to stop that arsonist, that thief, that murderer. And that means coming together to fight Christian nationalism. That means organizing. And if you are a Christian, I mean, hosting events like this in your church, I mean, this is such a good example of what I am talking about. There's an atheist in the pulpit to preach values and the dangers of Christian nationalism, right? And truly, like, I mean, the Bible says, put your own house in order, right? Like, we need Christians to help fight Christian nationalism. That might mean arguing theology. That argument has been going back quite a ways. Lincoln made this point in his second inaugural. He said that both sides read the same Bible and pray to the same God. In 1865, I think that was May of 1865, he was killed a month or two later by John Wilkes Booth, who believed that slavery was the greatest of blessings that God has ever bestowed upon a favored nation. So you might engage on that front if you so choose. Or you might talk about how Christian nationalism is a threat to our democracy, everything I've been saying today. Christian nationalism is going to come for everyone. Again, there is no amount of power or privilege that is going to satisfy it. They will take and take and take and take. They will ostracize and marginalize and alienate and discriminate until every group is othered. They need an enemy, they need an other, they need a scapegoat to blame, and they're going to keep fighting and finding those others until kind of they eat themselves. But we're not going to let it get that far. We can't let it get that far. We're going to stop them. So educate yourself, fight Christian nationalism, disinformation, defend the separation of church and state, join and organize popular movements that refuse to accept the inevitability of Christian nationalism, and center shared values, not shared beliefs. Those are the way to do this. Because tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. Thomas Paine wrote that at a pretty dark time in this country's history. Not really this country yet, even. But every darkness must pass, a new day will come. And when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer, the brighter. And it's true that the arc of the moral universe is long and that it bends. But it bends towards justice because we bend it. We have to do that work. And America will never be a Christian nation. Because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America. And that really is the choice that we face. America or a Christian nation. Because we cannot have both. Thank you. And so Monte's going to come on up. Monte's going to come up and we're going to sit and chat for a little bit, 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to do Q&A. And we will have somebody walking around with a mic to do that. So, I mean, I want to ask the first question.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Because I did kind of like I put you on the spot a little bit, not that you're not used to that. But can you,
It happens.
for folks who don't know your story a little, can you tell a little bit more of your story about leaving Christian nationalism behind?
Yeah, so in my intro, I gave a little bit of my background. I'm number 5 of 6 children, because to quote my pastor growing up, we have to outbreed the secular people. Gross. But I grew up in very, very strict Christian fundamentalism, very strict gender roles, because of my dad was a lover of whitewashed American history and the Bible. So I was privately tutored in theology and American history my entire life by my father, but I also went to all Christian nationalist schools. My elementary school was called Heritage Christian Academy. It was named after the Heritage Foundation. It was founded by my grandfather.
Wow.
And then I went to a high school that was a boarding school, also a Christian nationalist school called Sunshine Bible Academy. in the middle of South Dakota, and then I went to Liberty University. So there was no point in my education where I did not have Bible classes in school, whitewashed American history, think PragerU, Turning Point American history my whole life, but I also had private lessons with my father. I was tutored by him for as long as I could read, and I started reading at 3. And that ramped up at the age of 10, which was when my dad realized, because I skipped 6th grade, he's like, oh, she's smart. So now we're gonna prep her for this pathway that she's on. And when I went to Liberty, they required theology courses. My degree is actually in the hard sciences. I was planning to go to medical school. But they required theology. I was able to do that in Israel. And I didn't realize this at the time, but that trip was a big part of the beginning of the end. So we went to the Dome of the Rock. We were in Jerusalem, and I had never seen Muslim people before, right? I had heard all these terrible things about, the Muslim crisis and Islamophobia and all these things. And I'm watching these beautiful people from all nations come up and worship. Some of them are crying because it's their first time they've seen it. They're having these incredible visceral reactions to worshiping together. And I had seen the same thing at the Wailing Wall the day before. And I had seen it in churches I had gone to, and I was like, well, they don't seem scary at all, quite frankly. And I was there after a previous Gaza incident. So we weren't able to even access Bethlehem or the West Bank. Mm-hmm. And the military's walking around, everybody's armed with fully automatic weapons. And I remember thinking, isn't faith supposed to make us better? Why is it like this? Why is there so much violence? Why is there so much hatred? Because when you're walking through the streets of Jerusalem, you can feel that all it take was like a pin drop to make everything erupt. So that was where I really started looking at church history on my own for the first time. But the big turning point for me, I was engaged in my early 20s. I had done all the check boxes. Now I needed to get married and have kids, which I did not want to do. But I was like, okay, I'll do it. And his younger sister, half-sister, turned up pregnant at 12.
Oh.
And we found out that she had been being molested by her mother's boyfriend since she was 9 years old. And she had just finally gotten pregnant. And I'm sitting in the room, kind of as a tangential family member. At this time, I am a pro-life, no exceptions person. Mm-hmm. And I had been raised to believe that after birth abortions were real. I was 23 and I still believed this. I had been raised to believe that most abortions happen late in term, that pregnancies from rape don't happen. It's a lie the Democrats use to kill babies. I believed all these things. I'm sitting in this room, and this is, the police are involved. They're doing DNA, this is a whole situation. And at one point, her father and stepmother call me and say, can you take her to this teen class? We can't get back from work in time. So I'm like, yeah, I'll take her as a pregnancy class, because they didn't know what was going to happen. They were waiting for official police involvement. And I take her, I go into this room, it's all teen girls. The oldest was 19, most of them were 15 or 16, she was 12. And out of all these girls, only one of their boyfriends is there, and he's age appropriate. All of the other fathers were over the age of 21. And I'm sitting in the back, and pregnancy's in my top 3 fears. I think that women that have babies are just superheroes. I would rather swim with sharks. It scares me so bad. So I'm in the back of the room. This is the reason I didn't go to med school. I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I'm watching this class unfold, and I'm looking at these little girls. And it was the first time it ever dawned on me, where is the accountability for men? Where are these fathers? And I realized that never in my life, I had heard all of this, slut-shaming teen moms or single moms, all of this abuse around women. And as a woman growing up in this movement, and I talk to friends about this all the time, and every single friend of mine that is deconstructed says the same thing. I would rather tell my parents I accidentally killed someone than I had sex. That is how much that is attached, that the only value you have is to be young, pretty, and a virgin, and your value is gone if you don't have that, which is one of the reasons that pedophilia is so rampant in fundamentalist communities, because they place such a high value. You keep going younger and younger because you want pure, untouched, untainted, meaning doesn't have experience. And so that night was the first time I was like, this is wrong. I'm sitting in the back of that room saying, there is no good God that would force a 12-year-old to suffer more when she has already been suffering at the hands of an adult man for 3 years. I just could not believe that. I couldn't reconcile that. So for the first time that night, I started researching abortion. I had never actually researched it on my own, because when you're growing up in these movements, you don't believe that your parents and your teacher and your pastor and your Sunday school teacher and the adults at church are all lying to you. You just think, oh, everybody says this, it must be true. So I remember the first statistic I found was that 93% of abortion happened before 14 weeks. I was pre-med. I was like, 14 weeks? What? And everything I found just made me angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier.
And angry because you felt like you were being lied to.
Because I knew I'd been lied to.
Yeah.
And my protest with the church, so 23 was kind of the light bulb moment, but now further into my deconstruction, I realized it really happened at 9. Because 9 was when I recognized the gender discrimination in the church. I went to Sunday school. It was summer. I was wearing one of those sleeveless dresses, like a thick sleeve, right, for a little kid. The teacher makes some comment to me, because I was also tall, about, making sure you dress modestly so you don't cause a man to stumble. I kind of believe you're less likely to stumble if you watch where you put your own feet. But as a 9-year-old, I asked her something along the lines of, if men are supposed to be leaders, why can't we trust them to lead themselves? Because even at 9, I recognized that is not my fault. And she kicked me out of Sunday school. I was no longer welcome in her class.
You were asked to leave, yeah.
And 2 weeks later, I was in adult church. And it was my first wives submit to your husband's sermon. I was sitting next to my dad. I was raised by my dad. He did remarry, but my stepmother is a whole other... Anyways,
we'll do that next time.
Whole other issue.
We'll do that next time.
We need to have that conversation at a bar where everyone can have a glass of wine. But I'm sitting there and I'm listening to all this stuff about wives submit and complementarianism and literally separate but equal doctrine for genders. Yeah. And even as a kid, and I'm looking at Ephesians and I'm like, when's he going to get to the husband's part? He didn't. He ran out of time. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, again, and even the logic in my brain at 9, I'm like, you can't tell me that a relationship where only one person gets to make decisions, only one person has resources, only one person has power, only one person has autonomy is equal. That's not true. And I didn't have the knowledge yet to take it to its logical conclusion of, hey, maybe this religion made by men was built to subjugate women. Didn't have that vocabulary yet. What I did think, because I was a devoted Christian, is, okay, well, I don't want to disappoint God. So when I got home, I was thinking about this the whole way home, went to change my dress, my sinful sleeveless dress, and I took my Bible and I chucked it across the room. I was like, I'm not getting married then. It's like, I'm not going to make God mad, but I'm not doing that. I'll do anything for love, but I will not do that. And I also knew at 12 that I didn't want to have kids. Like I would have pregnancy nightmares because it was being so taught to me that this is what you have to do. And I knew that wasn't, but I didn't know it was an option until when I was 27, a lovely married woman with children said, do you realize that you don't have to do that if you don't want to? And I'm like, wait, you can do that? What do you mean you can do that? So the abortion was really my first social justice pivot where I was like, wait a minute, because I knew immediately what this was because I'd seen it in the church already. I was like, oh, this is about control. This isn't about justice, because if people who are anti-abortion were genuinely concerned with justice, these anti-abortion laws would have, if life begins at conception, so does child support. They would have mandatory prison sentences for sexual offenders. They would be demanding an overhaul of the foster care system. They would be trying to put as many kids into loving homes, regardless of their sexuality or religion, as they possibly could. But there's none of that because it's not about any of that. They would be advocating for SNAP benefits, Medicare, Medicaid. So as with most people that approach deconstruction, once one issue falls, they topple.
It's dominoes.
Yeah, it's dominoes. Yeah. And then, and at that time I was also researching church history and diving deeper into scholarship around the Bible, and you realize these arguments around homosexuality, all these, you're just like, this is all bullshit. And it's very destabilizing. And in the midst of that deconstruction, 3 years into it, Trump shows up. And I'm like, this guy. And
Cyrus.
especially my dad, and because my mom left him, was like my whole life, the sins of the adulteress. Oh my, I had to memorize, we had to memorize front and back pages of Bible verses every week. And if you didn't, you got your ass beat. And we had 2 front and back pages about verses on adultery. My dad was hurt. He didn't choose therapy. And so
Can we pause for one? All men out there listening, go to therapy.
Please. For the love of God, please.
Continue.
So I see Trump show up, and at this point, I am still like a very devoted Christian. And I am watching all these people I grew up with who taught me to love my neighbor and fight for justice and fight for the underdog and against sexual immorality and stealing, and just salivating over him. And I'm like, I beg your finest pardon. Did we read the same Bible? Because I think you guys missed the red part. Like, I think the red words you skipped over. And to my dad's credit, like especially in the spring of 2016, my dad was not on board. My dad did carry his strong stance about moral character should be a prerequisite for leadership. And in the summer, I realized I really have to have a conversation with my dad. Like he knew I was pushing back on him on ideas. We were having these conversations. He knew I was shifting, but I knew I needed to sit down and have a real conversation and say, I am diametrically opposed to the values that you have. And the day that I decided that, I had a conversation with my dad where he had butt dialed me. I was in a fitness class actually. Come out, call him back, and he's just really happy and we're talking. We'd been fighting a lot over some values issues. And he said, I want you to know that I'm so proud of you. He said, I've never seen someone pursue what they want more than you do. And he's like, I understand that you disagree with me. I just want to make sure that every conversation ends with us telling each other that we love each other. And that was the moment I was like, I have to have this sit down with Dad. And he died that night. And 6 hours later, I get a phone call that he had passed away. And under really suspicious circumstances, my stepmother profited $11 million off my dad's death. And so I was in this space of losing my entire worldview and also losing the person that was central to my life and that worldview. And it was extremely destabilizing, because what people don't realize is that, and it's hard sometimes with Christian nationalists and MAGA people, this is all about belonging. Yeah. It's all about being loved. It's all about being part of the in-group, because you don't want to go to hell. You want to survive the tribulation, but also you know that if you walk away, you're going to lose your church, you're going to lose your family, you're going to lose your friends. And losing all of that at the same time was something I almost didn't survive.
Yeah, which is by design. I mean, hearing you tell your story, it's so striking because keeping you in that belief system so depends on insulating you from the outside world and outside facts. Like
high control.
Yeah, and you talk about like all of the different schools that kept you, sealed off from
Pokemon as demons. Yeah. Just remember that.
Facts about abortion. But and this goes to the combating the disinformation, but also towards like facts are not necessarily going to be the thing that like gets at somebody. It's going to be something that is more emotional and gets at them at a more visceral level that allows them to then go out on their own and seek answers to the cognitive dissonance that has been sown through kind of those more visceral gut punches.
And for so many of them, especially if they grew up in this movement, and especially if they're women in this movement, they have never felt loved for who they are as a person. Ever. Love has always been attached to obedience and performance. And so for them, that fear is absolutely debilitating, because it is foreign to them that you might actually just love them for who they are instead of a checklist. Someone said this to me the other day, and I burst into tears because I'm still working through this. It's been over 10 years, and I have purity culture stuff pop up. I have work addiction stuff pop up where I still feel like I have to perform so much to prove my worth. And someone said to me the other day, you can ask for what you want and still be loved. And I was like, can we stop for a second? I need a minute. But it just reminded me, I really try to reconnect with, as frustrating and angry and dangerous as this movement is, the bulk of its followers have no understanding of what belonging can look like. And because a lot of it is projection, and we make jokes about how many of them are in the closet, and it's true, because they think that if they came out as who they are, they would be hated and rejected because they've never been accepted for who they are. And so it is this wrestling where your story matters so much more than the facts. The facts are secondary. And that's why, there's a lot of criticism around, oh, until it happens to you, you didn't care. There's a lot of truth to that. And it's not necessarily a negative. It's until someone can emotionally connect with it, they will not intellectually connect with it. I've been a data-driven, very logical, kind of not so emotional person my entire life. But it wasn't until I saw that little girl that I realized, oh, I'm wrong. Like, this isn't what justice looks like. We have these built-in, like, consciences and stuff. And I think it is what you said, that combination of, yes, you have to be able to have the conversation. You have to be able to hold the argument. But personal story and personal lives matter so much more to being able to sway people.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do in church. They control the temperature of the church. The chords of the song are built in a way to be emotionally moving. They have you actively participate with your arms. One of the things that's compelling about churches is humans are built to sing and dance. Where do we sing and dance collectively outside of church? We don't. That's part of it. They play into natural spiritual needs people need, and emotional needs, joyful needs. They curate these massive emotional experiences. You'll have the drummer swell right before that last chorus, dead silence. It's quiet. Moves you so that they can create that emotional lock. And it's all emotional, because at the baseline we are all emotional beings, and what they've been able to do is capitalize and manipulate that.
I mean, even your recognition at 9 years old that this is right, what you're talking about there is, it is unfair.
Yeah, it's not fair.
This is and we have this innate sense of fairness. And this is what I mean by the permission structure of Christian nationalism, right? It allows them to go in and subjugate that and suffocate that, especially out of kids, right? And like, no, don't focus on this or that. Focus instead on this, on your role, on being part of your community. And if you're not able to do that, you're betraying the community, all this stuff. And even that aspect of just fairness goes to that kind of emotional gut punch that's going to start getting people to maybe wake up and change their minds.
And it's also about, I think, remembering too that is it anyone familiar with James Dobson? Yeah. So James Dobson and Bill Gothard and the umbrella of authority. So a lot of the people that are in these movements were raised under this idea. So if you've never seen the infographic of the umbrella of authority, it's God, Father, Mother, children. And sometimes they'll put pastor between God and Father. And what they do is they teach you, again, this is God's natural order, even though, interestingly, in the natural world, the women is usually the dominant. It's funny, interesting.
Umbrellas are also not very natural.
Umbrellas, weird pick.
Yeah.
But what they do is they pitch this as not only is this your role, so if you feel conflict with this role, like I did, I could never be a stay-at-home mom. That is the hardest thing I have ever done. I did it for my sister for a while when she was working 12-hour shifts. If any of you have been a stay-at-home mom, you are literally the most magical human being I've ever encountered. I thought I was going to lose my mind. Not everyone is built for it, right? When all of these systems are built on this premise that women aren't unique human beings. But they're built on this system of, if you are questioning, so if you're a wife questioning your husband and how your husband treats you, you are by default questioning God. So they've also not only been raised in this system where love is dependent on your performance and your obedience, but also that if you question it, you are defying God, and that is your rebellious, sinful nature. And it becomes this fear-based tornado where they're afraid to even ask the question. The reason that I call my followers the coven of curiosity is, one, I want to sanctify coven a little bit, because, they didn't burn witches, they burned women. But also because I want people to sit with the question. I'm like, you don't have to agree with me, that's fine. By all means, please fact check me. Can you sit with the question? Because what they missed, what their pastors didn't tell them, is that faith requires doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. Yeah. And as soon as someone is certain about matters of faith, I know they're lying. And so it's this mix of the humanity of it, understanding what the system is, and being able to reach people and get them out of it. Because the higher ups, the people on top, they're not Christians at all. This has become a convenient vehicle for them, right? Like the Trumps and all those people, they don't care. It's just convenient. But the people who are following, who are part of this movement, many of them are committed Christians who have it wrong, but they've also been told that that little nagging doubt that they've had since they were 5 is sin.
So Monte and I will go all night.
Yeah, sorry.
But-
That ended up being a lot longer than I planned.
No, not at all, not at all. But we do want to give you all a chance to ask questions of either of us. We do have a microphone, one of these somewhere that you're gonna use as a handheld mic. Please speak into the microphone because we have people online watching and they won't, even if you can project, they won't be able to hear you. And then we also have some online questions that Maribel is going to ask. Maribel, do you want to go first or do you want to send the mic around? Who's our, April, you're gonna, okay.
I've got one here that I think is pertinent. I was able to scroll before.
But speak into the microphone, Maribel.
I will. Okay. Right, so the question is about, thank you. The question is about county commissions and I'm assuming other, entities opening with Christian prayers, which sometimes seem pretty long. And should we be fighting to allow other communities, other religious communities to also be allowed to open these meetings?
So the law on prayer before government meetings is bad. The Supreme Court got this wrong. The first decision was 1983, Marsh versus Chambers. And the Supreme Court looked at the history of prayer in the United States and said, it goes back kind of a long ways. They prayed this is where the Christian nationalists will confuse you. They'll say the Constitutional Convention, which is not correct. There was a prayer proposed at the Constitutional Convention and it was rejected. And in Ben Franklin's own handwriting, you can see he wrote, the convention, except for 3 or 4 people, thought prayer unnecessary. There's an apocryphal story about how Alexander Hamilton said that we had no need of foreign aid. Probably not true. But there was a prayer at the Continental Congress. So this is 1774. We haven't declared independence. We're Britain. Like, Britain prayed, okay? The reverend who prayed was a guy named Jacob Duché.
Nice.
Thank you. She said it, not me. And he turned out to be a traitor to the American cause of independence, wrote a letter to George Washington condemning the Declaration of Independence, talking about how the Continental Army was a bunch of cowards, the Continental Congress was awful, and is, by the way, still held up by Christian nationalists today as this hero. They just never mentioned any of that after part. The traitor who gave America prayer. Anyway.
Also is Britain and God was like, nah.
Yeah. So that is the prayer that they cite. They don't get into any of the other like actual kind of First Amendment, So anyway, in 1983, Supreme Court says, well, we've got a kind of a history of prayer, so I guess we're gonna allow it. And then in 2014, the town of Greece in New York is having Christian-only versions of prayer for the most part. And this, well, not quite this version of the Supreme Court, but the Roberts Court, which has just been on a crusade, see American Crusade, the book I wrote, says, yeah, you can do Christian-only prayers. I do think it is absolutely worth fighting back. It's just, the reason I'm talking about the law first is because the answer to fight is not trying to win a case in court with the current Supreme Court. That's not going to happen. The answer is, yes, doing some sort of organized pushback and movement and getting people in there to say a secular invocation or a Jewish invocation or a Native American version of a prayer. And those can be really effective, one, at calling attention to the hypocrisy, because what often happens is, and this has happened in the Arizona legislature a couple times, somebody will get up and say a secular invocation or a non-Christian prayer, and then one of these Christian nationalist legislators gets so pissed off that they get up and say a Christian prayer immediately, because they don't think the other prayer counted. And it's like, well, this is why this is a problem. They say that their justification for it is that they are adding solemnity and dignity to the proceeding. But they're only doing that for the people who believe in the God that is being prayed to. For everybody else, it's just alienating. And it'd be far better to just not do that. And if people want to pray, let them do it in their own way before these things. But I do think organizing against them and getting out there and telling, there's no reason, you can tell the commission not to do it. Tell them that you feel alienated. Use the public comment period. Get up there and say, hey, I was here to talk about like the sewer line on my street or whatever it is, not to be at a church service. And I think we should have a separation of church and state, even if the Supreme Court blew this one. So April will walk around. April, you can just be in charge of whoever you want. She has all the power.
I think we all have people close to us and families that I'd really appreciate an opening line to be able to reach them. If you guys have any suggestions for us, I'd appreciate it.
I think especially for like religious family members, you know, when they're heating up on a topic, I always lead with, what does Jesus say about that? Because if I'm going to make them argue with Jesus, not me. Like, you try Jesus, not me. But really taking them back to the red words, especially if they're arguing from a religious standpoint, that's typically my first go-to, is I force them into a position where I'm not attacking you, I'm not accusing you, but I'm going to make you articulate your position because you're claiming that this is biblical. And then I go from there. And if someone, and again, because the basis of this for most people is religion, I either use that or I ask them, well, what did Jesus say were the greatest 2 commandments? And I really focus on love thy neighbor. I'm like, well, who is your neighbor? And again, make them sit there and articulate it and think it through and bring the temperature down. Because then what's going to happen is they're going to be forced into a position where they have to admit what Jesus said, or they're going to go silent. Win.
So the 2 things that I would say, not as opening lines, but just the 2 pieces of advice I would give if you're ever having a conversation, and with a contentious conversation in particular, but it doesn't necessarily have to be about this, but is 1, to temper your expectations. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people go into these conversations like wanting to win or wanting to persuade the other person or expecting to persuade the other person, and that is just never going to happen. I mean, I do this for a living, and I can like think of 2 times where that's actually worked. And I was shocked with one of the times. Anyway, I'll tell that story later. So temper your expectations. That should not be your goal. Your goal should not be to change somebody's mind. Your goal should be to get them, which is part of what Monte is talking about, to get a little bit of cognitive dissonance going. And one of the best ways to do that is to get them thinking about it and trying to justify. You are not going to change their mind. They have to change their mind, right? So that first piece, temper your expectations. And the second one is really, and this goes to what you're talking about too, I really think it's study active listening and learn how to ask them questions and make them do the talking. That is a great way to plant that cognitive dissonance. And my goal when I'm having these conversations is to keep that line of communication open, to do it in a way that is friendly, that is kind, so that when they're sitting there in bed at 11 p.m., pissed off, wishing they had said this and looking things up on their phone and like, God damn it, now I got to ask Andrew about this, that they can come back and do it.
Yeah.
And I did this with an attorney in Texas in like 2012. We were working on a separate case, and he was on the other side, and he was like, just give me like 1 thing I should read. Not a book, but like just give me an article to convince me you're right. I think we kind of went back and forth like this for like 2 years. And finally he was like, yeah, you guys are right about all of this church-state separation stuff. Like, and he was very much opposed when it started out. Like, and it can take a lot of time, but it's worth doing that.
I'm the result of those small conversations that didn't change my mind. So because I was such a dedicated Christian nationalist, like I had both feet in the water. and I had been trained in Christian apologetics, I very much approached these conversations the way Charlie Kirk did. I was very aggressive like that. I would back people into a corner, and because I'm smart, I could talk them in circles. But it was a series of conversations that when my moment came, those conversations had planted those seeds of doubt. And like the two that come to mind immediately, when I went to Liberty, when I first arrived, I used to have a Confederate flag keychain. States' rights. And someone pulled me aside and he just said, "How do you think Black people feel when they see that?" And I was like, I'd never thought about it, right? Privilege. Didn't have to think about it. I took the keychain off, threw it in the trash, and never wore any kind of memorabilia like that ever again. And then a second conversation happened years later with my roommate at the time. We had a long conversation about abortion and the right of a woman's body. I gave her no ground, but that conversation is one of the primary things that changed my life when that moment came for me.
I just have a question to follow up on the one about the prayers at the county commissions, because that is what we have in Putnam County. And from what I think I heard you say that if we were to say, I have a Native American friend, I asked him if he would be willing to ask to give the invocation, and he said he would. So when we try that, when we ask them that, you have to ask the county commissioner, can I do this? If they say no, then what you're saying is really don't take that to court, because this is not the time that it's.
I mean, it's been decided is the answer. But like, that does not mean that you give up, right? There are other, like, would your friend be willing to go do it during public comment, right? Would you be like, so in the founding myth, I write all about government prayer and the history that I was getting into with Jacob Duché and all that, like, and what, like, go read some of those facts into the record at the next 5 meetings and help them understand that what they are doing is wrong. Have people get up there and say, hey, when you pray to your God and it's not a God that I share, like, you are not representing we the people, right? You're abusing your power to impose your personal religion on all of us. That's bullying. Yeah, I mean, it does not have to be a legal case for us to change things. You can absolutely get things changed without taking it to court, and that is where we are with government prayer right now.
And I would also say, and I advise people all the time, because people talk about, well, I don't, like, can I run for office? And I'm like, run for anything.
Yeah.
Like, they started this by a huge underground network of school board people. And they came in, they took over school boards, and they worked their way up. Because, I mean, they've been orchestrating this since the 30s with the family. And we've had other major Christian nationalist movements before that. But also, like, run for these small offices. Because the more of us that are in the room, the more the conversation can shift. So I think it's a combination of that. Keep confronting them with it. Even if you can't take it to court, give that prayer in public comment, confront it in public comment. But also, a lot of times, like for school boards and local elections, they're running unopposed.
Yeah. Also, and I'll just add to that, I love that advice so much, please. And I know, like, a lot of people, when we give that advice, are thinking, hey, I'm not qualified.
Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of War.
Yeah. Lauren Boebert is a member of Congress.
So,
if you are in this room or watching this at home, you are qualified to run for a local office.
You got this.
Yeah. We're up here. And then Maribel's got her hand up, April.
Andrew, I really appreciated your fourth point about talking about shared values. And my question to both of you was, what are some of those shared values that you think that we as non-church or secular people broadly can talk about? Monte, I heard you talk about deconstructing, and my idea that I would like to hear you think about or process is, my thought is that one of our biggest weapons against Christian nationalism is to be able to say that even though the church is not in charge, we do have shared values. And the better we can articulate what some of those are, and that it's not God is not in charge, therefore there goes the neighborhood. No. We do have things that we can all work on together, work from together, and just wanted to hear your thoughts, both of you, on that. If you
One of the things I would lean into with especially conservative Christians, is that they have the emotions right. Yes, someone is taking advantage of the government system and taxpayer money, but it is not the single mom on food stamps. It's the billionaires who are getting $700 billion in tax-funded corporate subsidies to generate more wealth and not pay their employees. So one of the things that I've found really helpful in these conversations as far as shared values is tapping into that and saying, you're right. I lead with you're right, and they're like, and I was like, yes, someone is taking advantage of the system. You are paying too much taxes in the sense that you're not getting anything back. What would happen if your taxes worked for you? And because the anger is correct, it's just being scapegoated to the wrong people. Because ultimately, like a lot of these parents, they want their kids to be healthy and happy and successful at the core of it. They want to be able to live in a world where they can afford a home. They're just angry at the wrong person. So I think if you can tap into saying, hey, vibes are right, but where you're directing it is not, I have found has been really helpful in those conversations. And I even tap into patriotism, where I talk a lot about, like, man, like, I respect freedom so much. How dare the government tell somebody what they can wear?
Yeah. I think freedom is a biggie. I really
Freedom
do.
is a big one, because again, the vibes are right, the emotions are right. It's about using that conversation again to create the cognitive dissonance, but also to like reaffirm with them that yes, something is wrong, but maybe the solution looks different.
Yeah, I mean, freedom is a biggie, and I mean, this won't work for necessarily like all the bridging the divide with Christian nationalists, but things like democracy and equality, right? Like, if you are secular, non-religious atheist, those are going to be far more important bridging the gap with those equality-minded, democracy-minded Christians who are hosting us tonight, for instance, who are out there who care about those same things, and those relationships and those shared values they just matter so much more than those shared beliefs because of the threat that we face with Christian nationalism. And there really are, I mean, it's so many of the things that I think we care about, we share. And you can actually see, I mean, this is reflected in the data, like, and it's the reason that Christian nationalists targeted the Supreme Court for capture. There's a quote that I share in American Crusade where a former employee of Leonard Leo's, and Leonard Leo's kind of like universally recognized as the guy who orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court, said that Leo realized that conservatives had lost the culture wars. Contraception, abortion, gay marriage, conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the court. And what they're saying there is, if democracy works, we are not going to be able to do what we want to do. And that is reflected in the numbers, right? Like 70% of the country, give or take, supports gay marriage, marriage equality, right? Like, depending on what numbers you're looking at, like up to 95% of the country supports contraception. That's everybody, right? And that's an insane number. And there is so much more that we share, and Christian nationalism is all about dividing us. And so holding on to those shared bonds is just so much more important, whatever they may be. Maribel?
First of all, I want to say that we're getting a little late. We're running a little late, so
we have a captive audience, so
yeah, okay. But I mean, I'm fine if you're fine.
Too bad. I'm just kidding.
We got a few more questions online. I'm trying to kind of curate so that.
Why don't you do one, and then we've got a couple up here too.
So there's a few here, but I'll curate some together.
Do the best one.
I've read that Christian nationalists are trying to create a theocratic autocracy in preparation for the end times.
Yep.
How do we counteract, or what can we say to counteract that?
Oh boy.
Well,
Yeah.
Takes my gloves off. So yes, they absolutely want to create a theocracy. For as much Islamophobia as they practice, they love the Taliban. Like, they love what the Taliban has been able to institute. They love how the Taliban treats women, and they'll scream about it, but they love it. They love it. And this, without getting too far into the weeds, but premillennial dispensationalism, which is the rapture and the end times ideology they're working from, wasn't created until the 1830s by a man named John Nelson Darby, who actually got the idea from a 15-year-old girl who had a vision at a revival. Yeah, of course. And so this is a very new church doctrine, and this is also being exploited. This is another situation where the leaders are not believing this. They don't care. They just care about getting money and being able to move their money offshore and being able to steal and rob from the taxpayer. But people that are following are participating in it. And this is the reason for the big overlap between Christian nationalism and Zionism, is because they believe that Israel plays a central role in ushering these end times. So the way that this works is, and I just did a video about this, in the 1970s, two men named Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham had visions where they said God came to both of them when they were in different parts of the country and said that in order to usher in the end times and the return of Christ, that Christians needed to take over all aspects of society, culture, and government, later called the Seven Mountains Mandate, in order for that to happen. It's an excuse for money and power. And so what I would do in those conversations, without getting too far into the weeds about Revelation, was a coded document of protest against empire. It was a warning against the return of Nero, because there was a myth and a legend from the 1st to the 5th century that Nero was going to return, that he was going to come back, he was going to make Rome great again and bring the empire down on Christianity. So it was never meant to be this predictive, God is coming down to rain down hellfire with a dragon. It was a coded text because they were criticizing Rome and they couldn't do that publicly. So without getting too far into the weeds of that, when someone's really having this argument or they bring up the end times or the rapture, the best thing to do is, one, go back to freedom. Still be like, well, do you believe that people should have freedom to believe that? Because I don't believe that. Do you think that I should have that right? And then be able to hold your ground on those conversations enough. You don't have to memorize the whole history of it. But like, know enough about John Nelson Darby to ask the question, saying, hey, well, this rapture doctrine really didn't show up until the 1830s. It didn't get really popular until the 1990s with the Left Behind series and Tim LaHaye. Why the change? And that's a little bit tougher. And typically, people aren't going to bring that to you in a conversation unless they're really theologically minded. That's typically kind of a level deeper for most conservative Christians. But know enough about the history that you can have the argument, but always center it back on freedom, because none of that is true. Revelation barely made biblical canon. I mean, it squeaked in at the tail end because many Christian theologians and historians at the time did not believe that it should be in there. They believed it should be like the books of Enoch that were not included because they were so fantastical and mythological.
Yeah, it's a literary asset.
It's a literary asset, and it's useful for power. Constantine didn't convert, he cult consolidated. He understood that by uniting Christianity in an ailing Rome, that he could control people better. So when you institute the Trinity, this new idea of hell, you bring in Revelation, so there's fear of tribulation. You now, instead of Revelation was warning Christians to not participate in empire, it ended up being a tool to make Christianity a religion of empire. It made Rome God's appointed leader, and then the Roman leader was God's emissary. Disobeying the leader is disobeying God, and now you have this threat of eternal damnation. Constantine was very smart about how he did that, but none of that doctrine is real. It's evolved over time. Much of our hell imagery comes from medieval literature, doesn't come from scripture at all, doesn't appear at all in the Hebrew Bible the way that we understand it. So I would approach it, if someone is talking about that, approach it from freedom, addressing, first of all, that we have the right to believe or not believe, but also knowing some of these key historical points, if you're someone that's having an ongoing conversation with someone or a group of someone's, because once you know even the surface level, it falls apart pretty fast. The mark of the beast is a numerical code for the name of Nero with gematria, because they didn't have a numerical alphabet. So just knowing even a baseline of those things dismantles that pretty quickly. But with most Christian nationalists, that's not forefront. They don't even realize how much it's influencing their thinking, because it's been woven in and it's not those clickbaity topics. That's how I would approach that. It's long-winded, sorry, but.
I'll say two things. The Left Behind series is so objectionable.
Like, just,
I mean, just from the writing is putrid.
It's so bad.
It is putrid.
it's so bad.
Okay, I had to avoid it. So second is defend the separate. You cannot have a theocracy if you have a separation of church and state. This is the second point I was trying to make. The separation of church and state is the cure for white Christian nationalism. They can get nothing if the wall of separation between church and state is tall and strong and impregnable, which it should be. And I mean, and it should not be, also, just a side note, a partisan issue, right? This is a founding American principle. And if I tell you I support the separation of church and state, you should be able to tell nothing else about me. Because it protects every single person. Every single Christian nationalist out there is able to believe what they believe, to believe in all of the things in Revelation that they take seriously, and the codes that they take too
I personally
seriously.
would love a dragon.
Yeah, me too. It'd be great. But they get to believe that because we have that separation. The freedom that everybody has in this country exists because that. So it's not a partisan issue, and you can absolutely persuade them of this. Especially when you spend a little bit of time picking apart, pointing out, their theology may not be the one that the government favors at the end of the day. In fact, odds are it's not going to be.
Well, and also, I like to point out to them as well that the separation of church and state protects religion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that it protects your faith.
Yeah.
Because when you have a government that now, and we see this with going back to Constantine, the Council of Nicaea, when they instituted Trinitarianism as the new church doctrine, they murdered and persecuted Gnostics and Arians, and that's Arian, not the scary ones, because now it was law. And so one of the things I have conversations with them about is, hey, you believe a different doctrine than this Christian over here. Would you want the government to be able to tell you what your doctrine has to be? Because the separation of church and state, at least in its early ideas, came from the founder who had originally found the original Baptists in the United States, because he was worried that the government would pollute religion. That's where that came from. And I can't remember the quote directly, but he said, we have to protect the garden of God from the wilderness of the world. So his concern,
Roger Williams.
Roger Williams, there it is. So his concern was protecting the purity of religion, because it works both ways. It protects both, and people on all sides of it. We have so many Christian denominations, and you have everything from Christian agnostics, people who are Christ followers. And so expressing to them that, hey, this is not just about making sure government stays secular. This is about making sure that you can practice your religion how you see fit.
Yeah, a powerful example of that is, if we have a Christian nation, they're preaching religion as truth in our public schools, right? And so which version of the Bible are they going to preach? Because some versions of the Bible say that Jesus was born of a young woman. Some say that he was born of a virgin. Are you going to be comfortable, Christian nationalist, when your kid is being taught that it was not a virgin, but just a young woman? And that one does scare quite a few of them into thinking. Do we have time for more, Maripel? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so Christian nationalism in Tennessee I feel like, is kind of unique. It is rampant all across the state, but in the state house in particular, it's not manifesting in the same way as it is in Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas. They're not necessarily going after posting the 10 Commandments yet. Texas, they're replacing school counselors with chaplains. They're not going that way. But where I see it manifesting is in the committee rooms when we're talking about reproductive rights, when we're talking about LGBTQ folks. It's happening in kind of low impact, low implementation bills, making November Christian Heritage Month, excuse me.
Gross.
So things like that, and it's kind of paving the way for more of those more publicity stunted kind of acts of Christian nationalism. So for example, one of our gubernatorial candidates for next year has a platform called Christ First Tennessee. That's State House Rep Monte Fritz, in case you're wondering. So I'm wondering, especially with these 4 action items, I'm sure you see this in other states, like where it feels a little more covert than as publicity stunt driven. If you've got any advice on like how we tailor maybe some of those action items when it's not garnering as much public attention because it's not, it's not getting the attention as like Arkansas or Louisiana or Texas is.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is media markets too, not necessarily tactics. There's big media markets in Texas, but that's a whole separate conversation. And I will say it is a lot less of a grassroots movement than you think. It's not, it's AstroTurf. In fact, they are pulling from a common well, just like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange, they are pulling from the same common well of bills. Like all those 10 Commandments bills in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas are the same. And in fact, what you were describing, the strategy you were describing of starting with these ceremonial bills or moves and then going to the bigger things, going to that primary goal of Christian nationalism to create two separate classes of people, was laid out in Project Blitz, like literally in the handbook that Wall Builders, which is one of these, and a couple other Christian nationalist organizations. Anybody know Wall Builders? This is David Barton. David Barton's out there, right? Granddaddy of Christian nationalist disinformation. Like so much of the
Whose
bullshit.
book was so bad his publishers pulled it?
Yeah. Yeah, a religious publisher pulled his Thomas Jefferson biography off the shelves.
Yeah, different David Barton.
No, the granddaddy of Christian nationalist disinfo. But the Project Blitz handbook says you start with these ceremonial bills. You start with Bible Celebration Week, and then you work your way up to 10 Commandments displays and In God We Trust displays. And then you go after marriage equality. And they laid it out clearly. Like you can go read the handbook tonight. You can find it. Americans United was part of a group called Blitzwatch, and we were able to work with some journalists and keep getting those. They named it Project Blitz too, by the way.
Yikes.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing about that is they're laying the groundwork so that when these bigger bills come in, they can say, but we're a Christian state. See? And on a local level, and this is something that I'm trying to build because next year I'm working on a lot of local level, really trying to shift seats blue statewide and locally. So I would just love to get your information or information of people that can send me these bills, because I try to keep my nose to the ground with all the news, and there is so much flies by. And so I'm trying to strategically place, I have some actual state representatives, some state legislatures that are like, I'm like, email me an update, tell me what's coming through so I can throw it into the ether. Because a lot of it is just having somebody blast it so that people see it and explain, hey, this is why this is a problem. And it makes me think of West Wing, where it keeps circling up in the episodes where they're talking about, they're going to talk about making English the national language, and they lay out why this is a problem and why it's foundationally discriminatory. And that's what they're doing here, is it's all in the lead up to create this argument of justification for the 10 Commandments and not allowing women in higher education. And I know a lot of those, people are like, oh, that's so extreme, it's so fringe. It's not. Like, I was raised in a church that they were like, well, yeah, women can vote, but ideally that wouldn't be the case. Like, okay. Whatever you say, Dad.
And I think we're gonna have to call it there.
sorry.
Mirabelle, you want to do one more, Mirabelle? Okay, no, I didn't
Yeah,
know what
and
that
then
signal
I
was.
think someone here would like
Okay.
to. Okay, my question is an aggregate of questions about tech billionaires and the money that is floating around in these, in the system that causes, that are funding all these, Christian nationalist causes.
Yeah.
So, how do we get rid of that? How do we find out who
Citizens
they
United
are
gotta
and
go.
what can we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say too, one, read Catherine Stewart's latest book on this. She does a very good job of following the money. She's awesome. She's on AU's board, really lays out the problem. And I mean, at Americans United, we try to check, we call it the $1 billion shadow network, and we have done the math, and it is very well into the $1 billion of Christian nationalist organizations that is supporting this kind of even this low-level legislation that you're seeing, all the way up to bringing these cases to the Supreme Court that are orchestrated and fabricated and made to weaponize religious freedom and change the law, to funding Leonard Leo's. We can track $580 million that Leonard Leo spent hacking the Supreme Court from 2014 to 2020. 580 million, that's what we know of and what we were able to trace. And like, I mean, just to point out the obvious, you don't spend $500 million to put impartial jurists on the bench, right? Like, that's not what they were doing. They bought one branch of the federal government.
Yeah.
And they have the money and the resources to do this. And I will point out one other thing that Americans United is doing is we are currently trying to stop Trump's IRS from essentially creating a situation that would make Citizens United look tame by comparison. They are trying to settle a case that has been brought by this guy named Michael Ferris, who some of you might know. He ran the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund, a bunch of the religious schools, ran Alliance Defending Freedom for a while, like died in the wool Christian nationalist. And he sued the Trump administration over the Johnson Amendment. And then with the IRS is working, basically colluding to settle the case, to make it so that the Johnson Amendment no longer applies. And the Johnson Amendment, for those of you who don't know, says that you can't take charitable donations and then turn around and get involved in partisan political campaigns.
Yeah.
Super important rule. Everybody loves it except for this narrow slice of vocal Christian nationalists. And the reason that they don't want it in place is because if it goes away, they can take in all of the we'll just say the tech money that the questioner pointed out. And we have no idea who is donating what, because churches don't file financial disclosures with the IRS the way that every other political action committee or every other C3 does. So you have a situation where this money is flowing into these churches, these mega churches probably, right? Think Robert Jeffress, the churches Monte grew up in. We have no idea how much. We have no idea what they're spending it on. If we're talking financial black holes, it's going to make Citizens United look like child's play, and nobody's talking about it. And we're desperately in court in Texas trying to say, one, don't approve this settlement, and two, you better let us into this case because you need somebody to point out what is about to happen here. I wrote an op-ed for Rolling Stone right around Thanksgiving if you want to read more about that and really trace that problem.
And I think it's also about, especially going into midterms, it's going to be about responsible use of AI. So the reason that they're choosing not to regulate AI is because they plan to use it for misinformation and for propaganda. Because now, especially with Google's latest update, they can actually create vocal recordings of you that are not you and claim that they caught you on tape, claim that they got a cell phone recording, claim. And so it's going to be really about being diligent with media literacy, because they're going to continue to buy more power and more access, and we have to be able to combat that. Because I did an interview with Timothy Hafey, like the Charlottesville Hafey Report and lead investigative counsel for January 6th. And he said all of this is created because we can't regulate social media, because we can't regulate misinformation because it falls under free speech. And unlike news sources who have legal parameters that they have to operate in or they can get sued, social media doesn't operate that way. So when we're combating getting billionaires out of politics, responsible use of AI, being able to identify it, being able to debunk misinformation is going to be just so huge, because there is a reason that Trump is signing an executive order that would ban states from being able to regulate AI, because they saw what happened with Zohran Mamdani, that grassroots can outdo money because grassroots works harder. And we sure can. But they're going to use information and wealth to try and buy more wealth access. And there will be a certain point where if too much is controlled financially, then those grassroots movements won't be able to dismantle that control.
I'm already so tired of asking if things are AI or not.
And they keep getting better. It's so disturbing.
You have to, yeah, you absolutely have to.
Have to like double check, triple check, verify.
Yeah. All right. Mirabelle, did you say one more after
One
that,
more?
or did you say?
I know our Miss Lady up here was waiting.
Yeah, you've had your hand.
Yeah, we had,
Okay.
We had 3 people who had their hands up. I'm going to get to each of them before you respond, because there may be overlap in their questions, if that's
Okay,
okay with
cool.
you.
Okay, and then we're gonna,
Okay.
then
Or
we're
a
gonna,
multitask.
then people can go mingle and eat, and we'll still be here
Okay.
to answer questions.
Was there somebody over here?
She said her question was already
Okay.
answered.
There were a couple on this side.
And these need to be questions now, folks.
Yeah, quick
Everybody's
questions.
really good so far. Really good so far. I want to hear your personal story online or out there in the hall later. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you first for everybody for making this possible. And I have a question about the approach that David French has used to critique and criticize Christian nationalism. And he's suggested that they need to look, and he's using Christian language,
Yeah.
look at the fruit of of the Spirit. And those fruits seem to be universal shared values like peace, justice,
Love,
peace,
joy,
love.
peace, patience,
Yeah.
kindness, goodness, faithfulness,
just-
gentleness,
Yeah.
and self-control.
Toss that softball to Monte
Yeah.
right there.
Is that what do you think of that as a critique?
If you are someone who is well-versed enough in the Bible to use it, use it. Because even though the Bible is it's a man-made, it's a fallible, ancient text, there's a lot of disturbing stuff in there. There's so many good things, but the fruit of the Spirit is incredible to use. That's something I've used as a tactic in the past to just say, hey, the Bible also says there is no male or female. Oops, oh no. But, and there's even in the Sermon on the Mount, which is always interesting because Christian nationalists, it's always the 10 Commandments and never the Beatitudes. Interesting how that works. But in the Sermon on the Mount as well, Jesus talks about that a good tree can only bear good fruit and a bad tree can only bear bad fruit. And by its fruit, you will know what kind of tree it is. So if you're well versed enough in the Bible to have those conversations, that is a powerful critique. Because again, make them argue with Jesus or Paul, not you. But those are the fruits of the Spirit. And when we look at that verse, Galatians 5:28, and it's, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, and address that, make them face it. And it also is a way to kind of highlight which of your movements are creating these. And if you have a problem with this verse, which of these exactly do you have a problem with? It's the same argument I use when someone's railing about DEI. I'm like, is it the diversity, the equity, or the inclusion that you have a problem with? But I think it's a fabulous critique. It's very smart. It's also why I love John Fugelsang's book, The Separation of Church and Hate. I love him. He's great. But it's a really practical way of, because the teachings of Christ, when you strip away the miracles and the divinity and everything, are amazing, beautiful, could create genuine universal good if applied. And it's a way to take those teachings back and to disarm them, because what they're doing is they're disguising bigotry and racism and hatred. They're, what did you say, dressing it in Bible drag?
Wrapping it in the mantle of the Bible.
They have to use God to justify this movement, because if God is on my side and he's not on your side, if you defy me, you're defying God, and it gives me permission to enact violence against you. That's the reason for pulling God into the conversation. Jesus is up there smoking a cigarette being like, I had nothing to do with this. I didn't say that. So if you're able to take away the shield of God that they've put up, it makes them accountable for their own beliefs and their own violence. So I think it's great.
I think everybody breathed a sigh of relief on the marriage equality thing. Do you think they're going to revisit that?
Oh, they're going to try.
Yeah.
They're absolutely going to try. Because it's not, at the core of it, it's not even really about gay couples. The gender roles are the hierarchy by which the Christian Nationalist Church survives. Without those roles, it can't survive. Homophobia is so dangerous for men, in the sense that men can't hug another guy. They can't accept touch. They can't show emotions. They can't wear the color pink. And it creates this system of men who are clinically depressed, can't process there it is. But the church also can't survive without the free labor of women, right? You're not going to get these big, massive families without women who don't have options. There is no VBS, there is no church program, there is no organization, there is no nativity scene, there is no Christmas program without the free labor of women. And so what it's really about is these norms help shield their power. And the only way that they're going to have those norms with the certainty that they want is by making that illegal. It's not actually about homosexuality. It's about forcing these gender norms to be able to keep institutionalized power. It's always, always, always been about power. They will absolutely revisit it. I'm so glad it wasn't picked up this time, because the woman who is married to her second husband for the fourth time it's like you need a diagram. She cheated on husband number 1 with husband number 3. She had 2 kids with husband number 1, cheated with husband number 3, gets pregnant with twins, leaves husband number 1, marries husband number 2, who adopts her twins. She then leaves him, marries husband number 3 with her children, and then divorces him and then remarries husband number 2.
As husband number 4. It's super convoluted.
Traditional marriage.
But that is also, by the way, like one part of the problem with her. Like the court rejected that case, not because of the fact that it was a challenge to marriage equality, but because it was a very messy case. It has been going on for a decade. There was 3 different questions presented to the court, not just the one. In the law, we would say it was a messy vehicle. So if you are trying to get the court to consider a question, you want a nice, clean vehicle that tees up the case like a ball sitting on, literally like a ball on T-ball, right? And that was not it. This court is just, in my opinion, waiting for that case. John Roberts has been on the court for 20 years. He has read from the bench 1 dissent. So when the court announces their cases, when the judges are really fired up, they will sometimes read parts of their dissent from the bench. Doesn't happen all the time. He's done it once, and that was when the Obergefell decision was handed down. You can head count based on what these judges have said, and the whip count does not look good.
And that actually may arise from Tennessee. So this past year, Tennessee passed a law allowing for medical care providers to deny care based on religious beliefs. And we saw the woman she's having to get prenatal care in Virginia because she's not married to her partner of 15 years. And so they're going to use something like that, and something where they can tee up that, they no longer have to sign a marriage license if it goes against someone's religious beliefs. They're going to tee it up that way because that serves a twofold purpose. It allows for them to go for gay marriage, but also for interracial marriage. Because loving is absolutely on the chopping block too.
And last thing, which is a happier note, John Fugel sang Separation of Church and Hate, Monte loved the book. It's on my TBR stack, is speaking at the Summit for Religious Freedom that Americans United is hosting in April in DC. THESRF.org, thesurf.org. Go check it out. Get your tickets now. It's like early bird special. You're getting an invite. I don't know if you know that. Anyway,
I haven't been invited yet, but I'm assuming I'll be there.
Yeah. We'll talk. Anyway, you all should come. And there are virtual things if you can't make the trip, but you should come. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. Monte, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Such a pleasure. Okay. Yeah, you're going to have to take hers because I'm...
On Saturday at the First UU Church, we're going to be having the executive director of the Humanists, American Humanist Association, will be speaking. Fish Stark will be speaking at the First UU Church. That's 7 p.m. on Saturday. Thank you.